I'm Joanne Labaugh, and welcome to our session on understanding water equity. I am a Path from Poverty board member, and I participated on a work team trip in 2018. For women living in Kenya, suitable drinking water is very difficult to find. Women and children often have to walk miles every day to collect water. According to the Machakos County government water policy dated 2018, the population of the country is 1.26 million. Out of these, only 350,000, or less than 28%, are in a water service area. Water sources such as rivers, springs, and groundwater are diminishing and are vulnerable to pollution and degradation. In addition, some of these resources, such as groundwater, are difficult to access. In our session today, Catherine will talk about some of the problems that contribute to poor water quality, and I will talk about the issues that affect Kenyans' access to water. We will take questions at the end of the session. You can enter your questions by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, or you can raise your hand and we'll answer your question. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Catherine, Community Engagement Program Manager here at Path from Poverty. As someone born in Africa, I'm sensitive to the stereotype that Africans need our help, that African women simply live in a broken system where clean water is beyond their way of life. It is important we know the context our partners in Kenya are living in. This is part of their dignity and part of our responsibility as partners. So here's a brief history of agriculture and water in the Ukambani region. You can see the region on the map. Nairobi is on the far west side of the region, and the Indian Ocean is on the east side, just to give you some perspective. The Kamba tribe of eastern Kenya are at their core a flexible and adaptable people, historically balancing land use and unreliable water. They integrated agriculture and grazing in a way that spread out risk and ensured group survival. Colonization removed the Kamba from their land and confined them in native reserves, similar to the US reserves on our Great Plains. After Kenyan independence, rather than become day laborers for others, the Kamba returned to be farmers, but now in the more fragile areas of their traditional land. Unfortunately, farming had changed with bad habits introduced from the West. Subsistence farming gave way to cash crops, overgrazing by large herds, deforestation for agricultural land clearing, and the resulting soil erosion, all of which took its toll on the local ecosystems. Shifting from planting millet and sorghum to maize, a crop vulnerable to drought, is just one example of unhelpful outside intervention. When endangered wildlife was on the international agenda, local Kamba communities were suffering from loss of biodiversity, which affected their nourishment and drought preparedness. With disturbed ecosystems, they lost pollination of diverse plant life, including medicinal herbs and wild food. Conservationists blamed the people's use of charcoal for the lack of trees, when the true culprit was government policy that insisted land be cleared for ownership to be recognized. Land reform initiatives ignored the issues with biodiversity, resulting in an additional loss of local knowledge and skill. As Nairobi grew in the 1980s, developers and construction companies started sand harvesting from the Ukambani area, disturbing sites important for water collection during the dry season. This is the first time we hear about women and girls walking long distances for water. Then the droughts that made international news hit in 1983 and 84. This devastated many across the region. More men had to leave to find work, and we see more and more responsibilities falling on women at a time when they needed to walk farther for water. By January 1985, a study showed 50% of the Ukambani's children were malnourished. This diagram shows the linkages between many of the things I've mentioned. Might be hard to read, but you start at the left and then work your way over. So take international markets. They lead to land shortages and policies that reduce livestock, which leads to increased reliance on wages and purchased food, and then to a declining diet and health. Issues are interrelated. You see arrows circling back to several of their linkages. You can see the cycle on the bottom, migration as a response to food insecurity and shortage of male labor, with several of these arrows pointing to self-help groups. The government started supporting women's self-help groups, food for work programs, and even Harambees to build up local community resources and development. While this built on the strengths of the Kamba to work communally, this intervention still pitted local needs with those living outside the region, often missing the priorities most needed, such as access to clean water. And this is what makes Path from Poverty different. We were dreamed into existence with women living in the Ukambani area. Leaders there, in turn, are in consultation with the women's groups they lead. This is what drives the programming. When we started, we were helping fund dairy cows, beekeeping. Our first work team helped with a building project. But since then, the women discovered that if they had ready access to clean water, they could fund and build things themselves. And so our model of matching their hardworking efforts turned to 2 water tanks and a solar panel as a way of giving them back what history has taken from them: independence to make economic choices for themselves and their communities. Now we're going to watch a video clip on the state of the river flowing into the Machakos, the Athi River. Take a look at this more detailed map of the Ukambani region. Rivers are thin blue lines. You have to look past the big yellow and red lines to see them. Nairobi is the pink square, and the river Athi starts just west of that, flowing through Nairobi, where, as the video says, it's the sewer for the city, before it winds north and then down again through the Ukambani area. Let's watch.
From the skies, Nairobi looks perfect. But on a closer look, this is a city choking from the bad habits of the millions of residents who call this home or a place of work. Does anyone know what happens to it all?
Sumu, poison kisungu.
According to scientists, a good population of Nairobi and its environs have such chemicals in their bodies.
The diseases, the money we are wasting in hospitals is just because we have caused the problem.
This is all part of River Athi. We are here in Goliba, the border between Kiambu and Machakos counties. These residents are downstream, and they know that something is out of place up the river. For decades, even before colonialists came, hundreds of years down the history lane, fishing along River Athi has been a lifeline, running in families for generations. However, pollution and other human activities are overriding the river's natural capacity to provide clean water for drinking, agriculture, and wildlife habitat. James Munyao lives and works on the river in Goliba.
Tuko katikati ya huu mto. Mto mkubwa sana.
Ni mto mkubwa.
Lakini unasema tuangalie ndani. Hali ilikuwa hivi?
Hapana. Maji ilikuwa safi. Sisi tulikuwa tunakunywa, hata kitu ya kunywa ilikuwa hapa. Kusota tunakunywa, lakini sasa hawezi.
Shida iko wapi? Huu uchafu unatoka wapi?
Ni siwenzi tuseme kwa hivyo. Kutoka pande ya juu. Kutoka pande ya juu kibika ndonyo sabuku. Hapo usabu unaongezeka.
On the other side are shanties made of bricks, tins and iron sheets, metal scrap dealers, and a middle-class housing complex flanked by concrete walls that plunge into the water. A dark slurry with floating bits of plastic, cloth, and rubber slowly passes downstream. So dirty is the river that even this Chinese contractor had the audacity to direct the waste from his machines into Ngong River at this bridge. People living in informal settlements dump their waste in the river. Most of it is plastic and won't degrade for decades. The rubbish starves the water of oxygen.
Hii takataka ni ile yenye ingine inapeperushwa. Juu na dumping site mingi ziko karibu na mto. Inapeperushwa ingine inaingia.
Nairobi River is literally the sewer that carries away the waste from millions of people who live in catchment areas. There is no doubt that the people of the city are killing Nairobi River and its tributaries. The analysis of our samples will take a month. The water laboratory informed us that most of our samples had lots of dissolved solids and twice broke down the machines. All the water sources were not suitable to interact with the environment. Some were contaminated with heavy metals. Most alarming were the results from the corroded pipeline. It had been contaminated with chromium, a heavy metal that is dangerous to human health. The level of chromium found was 0.965 milligrams per liter, nearly 9 times the recommended level of 0.1 milligrams per liter.
That's a heavy metal. It kills. It brings issues like cancer. This river connects downstream to Athi River. This is a major source of water in the downstream communities. Not even outside Nairobi. You go in Chiru, those other parts, people are using that to irrigate their crops.
But even as the government grapples with the problem of reclaiming Nairobi River and its tributaries, those living downstream along the River Athi are facing the consequences of pollution.
Thank you, Catherine. That was a powerful video. It really shows how Kenyan rivers are impacted by pollution. Surface water, such as rivers, streams, and lakes, are a main source of water to the Kenyan women that Path from Poverty serves. In addition to pollution, many of these water sources are threatened in other ways. I will be talking about some of the factors that affect access to water. Variable surface waters. Streams that used to flow year-round have become intermittent and do not flow during the dry season. This has been caused by land degradation, including deforestation and overgrazing. This is a photo of one of those streams. Dry stream beds can store water and have become important water collection points. They're often the closest and only source of water during the dry season. To reach the water, women often have to dig holes in the sand. This can be extremely unsafe because the holes are very unstable and subject to collapse, resulting in serious injury and even death to the women collecting the water. Lack of infrastructure is another factor that affects access to water. By infrastructure, we mean water distribution systems, piping, and water treatment system. Most of this infrastructure is limited to urban areas. Rural areas are underserved, and many have no service at all. Even accessing these rural areas is difficult. This is a photo of a rural road that is common in the region of Kenya that Path from Poverty serves. The Kenyan government is aware of these problems and has made many recommendations. However, the cost of constructing and maintaining water systems, like their roads, is quite high, and they do not have the resources to pay for it. Variable rainfall and drought. This graph shows the average monthly rainfall in Kenya over the course of a year. There are 2 rainy seasons in this area. The long range, which occur from March to May with an average of 13.5 inches of rain, and the short range, which occur from October to December with an average of 14.5 inches of rain. It's important to note that this rainfall distribution is not uniform, and even the rains themselves are variable. During the dry seasons, there is little or no rain, and the region experiences short-term droughts. This area is also known to experience long-term droughts when the rains do not come at all. When the rains do come, the region may experience flooding. There are very few dams that store water and can be used to prevent flooding. In addition to the physical hazards that stormwater presents, it often carries pollutants which contaminate water supplies. Poor groundwater quality is another factor. Groundwater quality in this region is poor, especially in the shallow aquifers. Drilling and maintaining wells, especially in the deeper aquifers, is very expensive because of the high cost of materials and power. Wells are also expensive to maintain. In addition, many of the locations are not very accessible for drilling equipment. This is a photo of a drill rig mounted on a truck. It would be very difficult for this rig to reach many of the rural areas. Climate change. According to the Kenya Ministry of Agriculture, the major problem posed by climate variation is water scarcity. Climate change has brought greater variations in temperature, more droughts, and when the rains do occur, they are much more intense. According to a Path from Poverty survey, 6 of 7 Kenyan program managers said that the rainy seasons have changed significantly over the last 20 years. Rain catchment tanks are a great approach. Tanks are attached to homes so women and children don't have to walk to collect water. They are cost effective and last an average of 20 years. They're screened and have an antibacterial liner so water will be safe to drink. And they can be delivered to very rural locations. Path from Poverty asks you to seriously consider donating to this cause. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joanne, for that presentation. That was great. All right, we are ready to take questions, but one thing, just wanted to give the credits to Kenyan Citizen TV for that video clip. All right, you may raise your hand or put a question in the Q&A box. I've got one right up front. How many gallons are in a tank? Joanne?
These tanks contain 10,000 gallons of water. So they're big tanks and they contain a lot of water and they can be used for a while between the rains.
All right. Remember, you can raise your hand and we can call on you. That's a good way to ask a question if you don't want to type it in.
I just heard a question, and that is, how do they deliver the tanks to the homes? And the answer to that is they use a medium-sized flatbed truck. And I should say the tanks are fairly light. And they can put several on the truck and then they take them to the homes. And the one slide I showed that had the very rough and steep road, we were actually delivering tanks on that road. So that's another benefit of the tanks.
Wow. Okay, here's one from Ruth. She types it in. About how many tanks per capita are needed in a village? Now that's a different kind of question.
Usually we provide tanks to homes, and then they, the people, they sometimes share the tank or the water from the tanks with the other people who are nearby. The homes, there's like several homes, I call them compounds. There's like 4 or 5 families together. And then the women get their tanks and they use that for water, for drinking and cooking and washing. As well as the gardens.
Right. And Ruth goes on to ask, so each family has their own? Yes. So each family, or often you have extended family living together. So it's kind of a compound, but each of those family compounds are trying to get 1, 2, some even go on to get 3 tanks per compound. And Linda Seagrave says, it was said earlier tanks hold 10,000 liters. Is it gallons or liters? We've got a metric question. So,
I'm checking.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll get an answer to you. And if not, we'll follow up at the end of the session.
I know you say 10,000 liters. That's how we've always talked about it.
I think so too. I might have misspoken.
Yeah. All right. So we've got one person's hand up. Oh, they took it down. Okay. And Veronica asks, do the tanks need a foundation? How are they built and installed? You were there. You haven't seen that, Joanne, but we've got some work team members that have been there, and they help build a flat cement base for it, right?
Actually, I was on the work team and we.
Okay, that's, yeah.
Yeah, I was on the work team and we actually did that.
Yeah.
The women make bricks ahead of time, and then we place the bricks, and then we add the cement and make the platform.
Okay. Joyce asks, is there a season when the tanks need to be put in? Before, after the rainy season? If it's installed during the dry season, do they still need to walk for water?
Yes,
So,
they're installed. When we have our work team trip, it's always the beginning of March, which is just before the rains. And sometimes the rains have even started, but we deliver the tanks on the last day of our work team trip. And then they're attached to the homes.
right. But they can be installed any time of year, right?
Oh,
yeah. I mean, if it's very muddy, you might have a hard time, very rainy, trying to build your base and have it dry. But yeah, they can be installed anytime. And yes, women still need to walk for water. And I should say, I think someone else here was asking, it would seem families need more than one tank. And that's true, that unless you have a very small family, one tank barely makes it from one rainy season into the next rainy season. So a lot of women are still walking for water. Yeah. And someone asked, how are the tanks distributed? Do you want to talk about the women's process, Joanne?
okay. Each woman belongs to a small group, and they work together. They meet weekly, and then they work on their fundraising activities, and then the women decide who is the first person to get the tank. And so it's truly a grassroots organization in Kenya. We work alongside of them, but in Kenya, it's the women who are making the main decisions. And I just want to add a little bit with the distribution. I know that Path from Poverty provides tanks every month. And sometimes because of the rainy seasons, we'll provide, like say for September and October, we'll provide all the tanks in September. We'll provide 2 months worth of tanks in September. And then we won't provide any in October, but they'll be all set up to catch the rains.
Right. So a couple more questions have come in. John and Mary ask, how many tanks have been installed so far? We have just over 2,000 tanks over these last 20 years. So that's a large number of tanks that we've been able to help with. And that includes the ones that we've matched and the tanks that the women have purchased themselves. And Darla asks, is this water mostly for daily cooking needs, or is it also used for water crops? And I know the answer to this one. Often the very first tank is for the family's needs. They will, because that's cleaner water, that's what they use for drinking and cooking, and they're still walking for water, maybe for their washing their clothes, using it to water chickens and that kind of thing. So often families are getting a second tank to then use for a garden, animals, those kinds of things. So that's what I've heard is the breakdown of the tank uses and needs. I hope I got you. We've got just one more minute here. I've got a hand raised by Bonnie. Bonnie, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, did I understand that the tanks cost $1,400 and that the women raised $1,400 as a group or as one person?
So they are working together in their group. They have sort of a monthly target that they put in and are trying to raise $1,400 at a time. So as soon as they've raised $1,400, they have a meeting and decide who is going to get that tank. We are also sending tanks every month, and they decide who's going to get that tank. So
how can they make $1,400 selling vegetables to each other or whatever.
It's very long. In fact, we should figure this out, Joanne. How long is the average for people to get enough money for a tank? Some women work for 5 or 6 years before
Really?
getting a tank.
And another question about that, with the 1,400, then do you supply 2 for every one that they raise money for, or just you match it with 1?
We match it with 1. In fact, this last year, they raised more money for tanks than we were able to raise. So
Oh.
we're behind in matching.
Oh,
Yeah. So
okay. Thank you.
all right. Thank you, Bonnie. I'm going to squeeze one more in here. John was asking, do many of the houses require new or modified roofs? Joanne, do you know that? And that's going to be our last question. Thanks, guys.
Oh, I don't know that. I do know that they modify their gutter systems, but I don't know about the roofs. I don't think they do. From what I witnessed when I was there, I didn't see anybody changing their roofs. I did see some, modification to their gutters and so for collecting the rain, but not the roofs.
I know that some of our original groups had thatched roofs, and they did have to get metal roofs. So you have to have a metal roof in order to catch the water into the gutters. Yeah. So that's the one.
I just want to add that this year the women raised enough money to buy 155 tanks.
It's amazing.
It is pretty amazing.
Well, thank you so much for attending this session. If you would like any further information or would want us to share this session with a small group you have, or a church group, or book study, please let us know. You can put your name in the chat and we will get back with you soon.